Morning arrived in Silver Crest Heights the way it always did. Loud, polished, cruel. By sunrise, the luxury strip was already alive. Expensive cars rolled past like they owned the road. Perfume drifted through the air. Women in designer sunglasses stood outside glossy storefronts, holding iced drinks and judging everything that moved. In that part of town, kindness was rare. Appearances were everything, and that morning, 3 women stood at the center of it all. Vanessa Okafor Banks looked flawless from head to toe. Her hair was perfect, her clothes were sharp, her smile was beautiful, but it was never warm. She had built herself into the kind of woman people envied, but under all that beauty was pride so hard it had become cruelty. Beside her stood Shanice Bello-Reed, her closest friend and favorite partner in mockery. Shanice always had her phone in her hand. She was the kind of woman who saw another person's pain and thought of views, comments, and laughter. Then there was councilwoman Patrice Dunlo Asiwaju, elegant, controlled, powerful, the kind of woman who spoke softly but carried herself like she was above everyone else. They stood outside a luxury boutique, watching the workers across the road, and then they saw him, Obinna Cole Adebayo. He was moving slowly out of the construction gate, carrying a heavy pan of wet mortar on his shoulder. Sweat covered his face. Dust clung to his clothes. His boots were stained. His body was thick and heavy. His rough hands tightened around the load as he walked with calm focus. To anyone who did not know better, he looked like just another struggling laborer trying to survive the day. Shanice's eyes lit up. "Oh, this is too good," she said, lifting her phone. "Look at him." Her camera turned toward Obinna. Vanessa laughed first. It was sharp and loud. "Please tell me that man is not serious," she said, looking him up and down with disgust. "He is sweating like that this early?" Shanice zoomed in, giggling. "This is going online. People are going to scream." Patrice folded her arms and tilted her head. "Men like that are everywhere," she said coldly. "They build, they carry, they sweat, and then they disappear. Society uses them and forgets them." Obinna kept walking. He heard every word. Vanessa took one step forward, making sure her voice carried. "No woman with sense would ever want a man like that," she said. "Look at him, fat, dusty, poor, sweaty. He looks like struggle itself." The women around them laughed. A few men nearby smirked too. But Vanessa was not done. She pointed directly at Obinna and delivered the cruelest blow of all. "That kind of man will die carrying mud," she said, "and nobody will even notice he is gone." More laughter. Shanice kept filming, loving every second. "Say it again," Shanice said. "Let me catch that clearly." Vanessa smiled wider, proud of herself. But then something changed. Obinna stopped walking. The whole moment shifted. He turned slowly and looked at them. Not with anger, not with fear, not with shame. He looked at them with a quiet, unreadable calm that made the laughter around them weaken for just 1 second. Vanessa's smile faltered. Shanice lowered the phone a little. Even Patrice straightened. Obinna said nothing. Not one word. He only looked at them, adjusted the heavy pan on his shoulder, and kept walking as if their cruelty was too small to deserve his voice. That silence hit harder than any insult. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Shanice forced out a laugh. "What was that supposed to mean?" Vanessa tossed her hair. "Nothing. He knows his place." But across the street, one of the older construction workers had been watching everything. His name was Jabari Cole, and the look on his face was not fear. It was warning. He stared at the 3 women, then looked at Obinna's back as he disappeared deeper into the sight. Finally, Jabari shook his head and muttered under his breath, "These women have no idea what they just did." And when he said it, even the morning air felt different, because for the first time that day, the laughter was gone, and trouble had already begun. The following morning, the laughter from Silvercrest Heights had already spread far beyond the street where it began. What happened the day before was no longer just a cruel moment outside a boutique. It was now a video, and that video was moving fast. Inside her luxury apartment, Shanice Bello-Reed sat curled on a white sofa with her phone in her hand, smiling at the screen. Shanice was already known as Vanessa's attention-hungry best friend, the woman who loved turning humiliation into entertainment. Now she was watching the numbers climb, and every new view made her grin wider. "Oh, this is blowing up," she said. The clip had a mocking caption. It had a laughing emoji. It had cruel comments pouring in by the second. People were replaying Obinna carrying mortar. They were mocking his body, mocking his clothes, mocking his silence. Across town, Vanessa Okafor Banks was enjoying every bit of it. She had sent the clip into private group chats. She had repeated her own insults with the same cold pride. To her, this was proof that she had power, proof that she could say something cruel in public and the world would applaud. "People are saying I told no lies," Vanessa said proudly over a voice note. But not everyone was laughing. Councilwoman Patrice Dunlo Asiwaju, polished as ever, watched the growing reactions with a different feeling. Concern. Patrice was still cold, still proud, still deeply wrong. But unlike Vanessa and Shanice, she understood something they did not. Public cruelty could become dangerous when the wrong person was involved. She called Shanice first. "Take care with this," Patrice said in a controlled voice. "Sometimes a nobody is not a nobody." Shanice laughed. "He is a sweaty man carrying mud, Patrice. What exactly is he going to do?" Patrice did not answer immediately. "That is exactly the kind of mistake foolish people make before trouble starts," she said, then ended the call. Meanwhile, at the construction site, Obinna Cole Adebayo returned to work as if nothing had happened. The same dusty boots, the same quiet face, the same steady hands lifting and moving cement. The workers around him kept glancing at him, waiting for anger, waiting for an order, waiting for some kind of reaction. It never came. By mid-morning, Jabari Cole, the older site manager who had watched the humiliation happen, finally walked over. Jabari was a loyal man, respected on the site, and one of the few people who understood that Obinna's silence was never weakness. He held out his phone. "Say the word," Jabari said. "I can have this nonsense reported and dragged down before sunset." Obinna barely looked at the screen. "No," he said calmly. Jabari frowned. "You want to just leave it there?" Obinna lifted another load without raising his voice. "Let people reveal themselves." That answer sat heavy in Jabari's chest. Elsewhere, at a modest roadside food stand, a young woman named Amara Daniels Okoye was serving breakfast customers. Amara was hard-working, observant, and quieter than most people expected. She noticed things. She listened more than she spoke. That morning, 2 customers at her stall were laughing over the same viral video. "Look at this man," one of them said, shoving the phone across the counter. Amara glanced down. She saw Obinna's tired face. She heard the women laughing. She watched him carry the mortar in silence, and her expression changed. "That is not funny," she said softly. The customers looked surprised, but Amara had already turned away, disturbed by what she had seen. At that same hour, in a cramped office filled with paper stacks and old case files, Malik Freeman Asiwaju had replayed the video for the 3rd time. Malik was an investigative reporter known for being sharp, patient, and hard to fool. He did not chase noise, he chased truth, and something about the man in the video would not let him go. He leaned closer to the screen, paused it, zoomed in. Then his eyes narrowed. "I know that face," he murmured. He turned to his laptop, opened an old digital archive, and started searching through files he had not touched in months, because the man the internet was mocking as a poor laborer looked very familiar, and Malik was suddenly certain of one thing. He had seen that man before, just not like this. By the end of that same day, the video had become the favorite joke of people who knew nothing and assumed everything. But while the internet laughed, Malik Freeman Asiwaju was no longer laughing. He sat in his cramped office with the video paused on his laptop screen. The image showed Obinna in dusty work clothes, carrying mortar in silence while the women mocked him. Malik had already watched it more times than he could count. Not because it was entertaining, because it was wrong. Malik was not a gossip blogger chasing noise. He was a serious investigative reporter, the kind of man who trusted patterns more than public opinion, and the face in that video kept pulling at an old memory. So he started digging. He opened archived business records, old articles, property filings, company reports buried beneath private ownership layers. The deeper he searched, the more one name began appearing in places it should not have. Adebayo Holdings. At first, it was just a trace, then another, then another. Malik leaned back slowly. "No," he muttered. "It cannot be." But it could, and it was. Across town, Vanessa Okafor Banks was enjoying the attention like it was perfume. That afternoon, she sat at a private brunch table with polished women who loved scandal almost as much as status. They laughed over drinks. They replayed the video. Vanessa smiled every time someone praised her confidence. "One thing about me," she said, lifting her glass. "I will always say what other people are too scared to say." The table erupted in approval, and once again, she felt powerful. Not far away, Shanice Bello-Reed kept feeding the fire. She reposted the video with harsher captions. She added laughing filters. She turned a cruel moment into a performance, and watched strangers reward her for it. But not everyone around them felt safe. That same afternoon, Councilwoman Patrice Dunlow Asiwaju stepped into a private corridor to answer a call. Her face remained calm, but her eyes sharpened the second she heard the voice on the other end. "Distance yourself," the caller warned. "Now." Patrice's jaw tightened. "What do you know?" "I know enough to tell you this is no ordinary man." The line went dead. For the first time since the video went viral, Patrice felt something cold move through her chest. Fear. That night, while the city still laughed online, Obinna Cole Adebayo drove his old truck into a modest part of town, far from the polished storefronts of Silvercrest Heights. There, he stepped out quietly and walked toward a small aging house with a damaged roof. An elderly widow stood outside, wringing her hands. "Sir, I told them I would pay little by little," she said, embarrassed. Obinna handed a folded envelope to the contractor beside her. "Repair everything," he said. "Tonight, if possible." The widow stared at him. "But what? Why?" Obinna gave only a small nod. "Because rain should not enter where a woman sleeps." He turned and walked away before she could thank him properly. It was a simple act, quiet, unannounced, but it revealed the truth no video could capture. Obinna did not live simply because he was poor, he lived simply because he chose to. Later that night, in a clean, elegant office, Dr. Zora Adebayo Cole finally confronted him. Zora was Obinna's older sister, a respected physician, and one of the very few people who knew the full weight of the life he carried. She stood across from him, arms folded. "Your silence protects your peace," she said, "but it also protects wicked people from consequences." Obinna looked down at his work-worn hands. "I know," he said. Zora's voice softened, but only slightly. Then decide how long you want to let them laugh. At almost that same moment, Malik found the final document he needed. He stared at the screen. Then he stood up. Because the man in the video was not just some laborer trying to survive. He was one of the hidden owners of the very district where those women had mocked him. And suddenly, the joke was no longer funny. It was a scandal waiting to explode. 3 days after the humiliation on Prestige Boulevard, the noise online was still growing. The laughter had not died. The comments had not slowed. And yet, for Obinna Cole Adebayo, life moved on with the same quiet discipline. That afternoon, under the hard heat of the sun, Obinna's old truck gave out on a narrow roadside stretch, just beyond the polished heart of Silvercrest Heights. The engine coughed once, then died completely. Obinna gripped the steering wheel, exhaled slowly, and tried the key again. Nothing. He sat back in silence. Then he stepped out, lifted the hood, and stared at the stubborn engine with the calm of a man used to solving problems without complaining. A few feet away stood a modest food stall with metal pots, a faded umbrella, and the smell of hot rice and pepper stew rising into the air. Behind that counter was Amara Daniels Okoye, the young woman who had already seen the viral video and felt disturbed by the cruelty in it. Amara was in her late 20s. She was hard-working, steady, and the kind of woman who carried responsibility without making a performance of it. She helped support her family through that small stall, and every day she worked with the quiet focus of someone who did not have the luxury of wasting time. She noticed the broken-down truck. She noticed the man standing beside it, and a second later, she recognized him. It was the same man from the video, not the women, not the laughter, the man they mocked. Without hesitation, Amara reached into the cooler, took out a bottle of cold water, and walked toward him. Obinna looked up when he heard the soft knock against the side of his truck. Amara held out the bottle. "You look like you need this," she said. For a moment, Obinna just stared at her, not because of the water, because there was no mockery in her face, no pity, no fake sweetness, just simple human decency. "How much?" he asked. Amara shook her head. "Nothing, it's just water." Obinna took the bottle slowly. "Thank you." "You're welcome," she said, then glanced toward the engine. "That truck doesn't sound like it plans to move today." The corner of Obinna's mouth lifted slightly for the first time in days. "It has made that clear." Amara smiled, and something about that small smile settled the air between them. A few minutes later, Obinna was seated on a low curb near the stall while he waited for a mechanic to call back. Amara returned to the counter, served 2 customers, then came back with a plate. "I made extra," she said, "if you don't mind simple food." Obinna looked at the plate, then at her. "You always feed strangers?" "Only the ones stranded in the heat," she replied. That made him chuckle quietly, and just like that, a conversation began. Not rushed, not forced, real. As they spoke, Amara shared parts of her life in the plain, honest way of someone too tired to decorate pain. She told him about her mother, Mama Eve Daniels, a gentle older woman now dealing with serious health problems. She spoke about hospital bills that kept rising. She mentioned her younger brother, Tari Daniels, a stubborn but loyal young man trying to help however he could. Then, after a pause, she admitted something softer. "I was supposed to study design," she said. "Structural planning. I loved it, but life had other plans." Obinna listened carefully. He did not interrupt. He did not offer empty speeches. He simply gave her the kind of attention most people only give to people they think matter. "And now?" he asked. Amara gave a small shrug. "Now I sell food and pray my mother gets stronger." Obinna lowered his eyes for a second. "I work in construction." he said quietly. That was all he offered. No title, no wealth, no truth beyond the simplest part. Amara nodded, as if that answer was enough, and strangely, to Obinna, it was. When the call finally came that help was on the way, he stood to leave. But before he stepped back toward the truck, he looked at Amara with a seriousness that caught her off guard. "I hope your mother gets better," he said. "I mean that." Amara's face softened. "Thank you," she replied. "Drive safe, whenever that truck decides to cooperate." Obinna gave a faint smile, then turned away. But after he left, Amara stood still behind her stall for several seconds, her hands resting on the counter, because the quiet man in dusty boots had done something unusual. He had listened like her pain was important, and that night, long after the roadside had gone still, Obinna made a private call. His voice was low, controlled. "Look into someone for me," he said. There was a brief pause. Then he added, "Her name is Amara Daniels Okoye." And the reason he wanted answers had nothing to do with suspicion. It had everything to do with the way she had already begun to move his heart. The following morning, the quiet conversation by the roadside was still sitting in Obinna Cole Adebayo's mind. But while he was thinking about a woman who had offered him water without judgment, another storm was already breaking, and this one was about to shake Silvercrest Heights. In his cramped office, Malik Freeman Asiwaju had not slept much. The sharp, relentless investigative reporter had spent the night verifying every detail, checking every record twice, then a third time. He was not about to publish a claim this explosive unless it was airtight. By sunrise, he had everything he needed. So he released the article. The headline hit the city like a slap. "The poor laborer in viral mockery video is secretly millionaire developer. Obinna Cole Adebayo." Within an hour, the article was everywhere. People who had laughed at the viral clip now stared at their phones in shock. The comments shifted. The same internet that had mocked Obinna suddenly turned on the women who mocked him. Cruel laughter became outrage. Smug jokes became public condemnation. And the first person to feel the burn was Vanessa Okafor Banks. She was in the middle of selecting outfits for a brand shoot when her manager called. "What did you do?" The woman snapped. Vanessa frowned. "What are you talking about?" "The article is everywhere. Sponsors are pulling out. They do not want their names attached to public humiliation." Vanessa's face changed. "No, that is ridiculous." But before she could finish, another call came in, then another, then another. One partnership paused, another ended. A beauty campaign quietly removed her face from its promotional page. The polished world she had built so carefully began cracking in real time. Across town, Shanice Bello-Reed was hit next. Her phone, which had been feeding her attention all week, now became a weapon pointed back at her. Her employer suspended her pending review. Old clips began resurfacing. Other videos, other moments where she had mocked strangers for sport. People she had humiliated before started sharing their own stories. Suddenly, Shanice was no longer the one controlling the laughter. She was the joke. "This is insane!" she shouted, pacing across her apartment. It was just a video. But the internet no longer cared what she meant. It only cared what she had done. Meanwhile, Councilwoman Patrice Dunlow Asiwaju moved fast. She stood behind a polished podium that afternoon and delivered a smooth public statement. Her face was composed. Her voice was measured. "My words have been taken out of context," she said. "Social media has a way of twisting moments into narratives that do not reflect the full truth." It was elegant, it was practiced, and it convinced almost no one. At the construction site, the energy was different. Workers kept glancing at Obinna with a new kind of respect, not because he was rich, but because he had been humiliated in public, exposed as a millionaire, and still returned to work in the same dusty boots without begging for sympathy. Jabari Cole stood nearby, watching the men close ranks around him. No one said it aloud, but everyone understood the same thing. If trouble came, they would stand with Obinna. Jabari stepped closer. You could stop all this with one statement. Obinna kept his hands busy, lifting and setting down materials with his usual calm. And say what? He asked. That they were wrong. Obinna looked ahead. They already know. By evening, the scandal had spread beyond gossip pages and angry comment sections. In a packed community hall, Pastor Elijah Kane, a respected local minister known for blunt truths, spoke to a restless crowd. He was a broad-shouldered older man with a commanding voice and no patience for class arrogance. When pride gets dressed in money, he said, people start confusing cruelty for superiority, but character always reveals itself. Always. His words spread almost as fast as the article, and at a modest roadside food stall, Amara Daniels Okoye read the same headline on a customer's phone. She read it once, then again. The quiet man with the broken truck, the man who sat on the curb and listened to her like she mattered, was not just a construction worker. He was wealthy, powerful, hidden in plain sight. For a moment, Amara just stood there in silence, but the feeling in her chest was not anger. It was not even shock. It was something stranger, because as she remembered his face, his voice, and the way he had spoken to her without pride, one thought settled deep in her heart. Obinna had not hidden behind silence because he thought he was better than people. He had hidden there because he was tired, and whatever was really buried inside that man's quiet life, the world had only just begun to uncover it. The following evening, after Malik's article turned Silvercrest Heights upside down, Amara Daniels Okoye was still trying to make peace with what she had learned. The man who sat on the curb outside her stall was not who he seemed. He was not just a quiet construction worker with a broken truck. He was Obinna Cole Adebayo, the millionaire developer the whole town was now talking about. And yet, the more Amara thought about it, the less angry she felt, because when she replayed that afternoon in her mind, she did not remember arrogance. She remembered humility. She remembered a tired man who listened carefully, spoke gently, and thanked her for a simple bottle of water like it meant something. That was why, when she looked up and saw Obinna walking back toward her stall that evening, she did not freeze. She did not bow. She did not panic. She simply stood still and watched him approach. Obinna stopped in front of the counter, his expression calm but cautious. I wasn't sure you would want to see me again, he said. Amara folded her arms lightly. Why? Because now I know you have money? Obinna held her gaze. Because now you may think I lied. Amara was quiet for a moment. You did hide the truth, she said. But no, I do not think you lied to hurt me. That answer landed deeper than she knew. For a second, Obinna looked almost relieved. He glanced at the empty chair near the side of the stall. Can I sit? Amara nodded. A few moments later, he was seated again in the same place as before. But this time the silence between them was fuller. He was not just a stranger now. He was a man carrying a story she did not yet understand. Amara came around the stall and sat across from him. Why do you do it? She asked. Why dress like that? Why work like that when you do not have to? Obinna looked down at his hands. When people know you have money, he said quietly, they stop seeing the man. They start seeing what they can gain. Amara did not interrupt. He continued, I wanted a place where my work was still work, a place where sweat meant something, a place where I could breathe without being surrounded by people performing for me. Amara studied his face. So you wanted to be treated like a human being? Obinna gave a small nod. Yes. She leaned back and let out a slow breath. Then maybe that is the saddest part, she said. A man can have everything and still be starving for something as basic as sincerity. That sentence hit him hard, because it was true. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Amara's voice softened. Money never impressed me, Obinna, but humility does. He looked at her then, fully, and something in his chest shifted. As the evening deepened, their conversation moved into harder truths. Amara told him more about Mama Afe Daniels, her mother, and the hospital bills that kept piling up. She spoke of how every small gain in their lives seemed swallowed by another crisis. She admitted she was tired in a way sleep could not fix. Not long after, a young man approached the stall, carrying a delivery sack over one shoulder. This was Tari Daniels, Amara's younger brother. Tari was protective, hot-tempered, and deeply suspicious of people who looked too polished to be trusted. He loved his family fiercely, but his pride often arrived before his patience. The second Tari saw Obinna sitting there, his eyes narrowed. So, this is him? Tari asked sharply. The rich man from the article? Amara stood. Tari! But Tari was already looking Obinna up and down. You rich men always move the same, he said. You show up with calm voices and deep pockets, then leave poor people cleaning up the damage. Obinna did not rise to the insult. He stayed seated. I understand why you think that, he said. That calm answer only made Tari blink. I'm not here to play games with your sister, Obinna added, and I'm not here to make promises I cannot keep. Tari's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, because for all his anger, he knew something important the moment he heard Obinna speak. This man was not afraid, and he was not pretending. By the time night settled fully over the roadside, Tari had stepped away, still wary but quieter than before. Amara returned to the chair across from Obinna, and the space between them felt changed again, stronger, closer, because now she was beginning to see something beneath his silence, not just discipline, not just strength, but loneliness. And later, that same night, as Obinna drove away, unaware of the storm building elsewhere, Malik Freeman Asiwaju stared at a new set of records on his screen. His eyes widened, because what he had just uncovered about Obinna was far bigger than hidden wealth. It was a secret that could shake the entire city. Later that same night, while Obinna Cole Adebayo drove home with Amara's words still echoing in his mind, Malik Freeman Asiwaju remained locked inside his office, staring at records that had just changed everything. He had already exposed Obinna as the hidden millionaire behind the dust and sweat. He thought that was the story. He was wrong, because the truth in front of him now was bigger, much bigger. Malik leaned forward, scrolling carefully through financial transfers, donor ledgers, and sealed non-profit filings. He had spent years learning how powerful people hid their fingerprints, shell accounts, quiet transfers, layered signatures. But this pattern was different. It was not built to steal. It was built to give. And every trail kept leading back to the same place, the Haven Bloom Foundation. The Haven Bloom Foundation was a respected women's support organization. It had funded emergency shelter, legal aid, rent relief, counseling, and education support for women and girls in crisis. Most people knew the foundation existed. Very few knew who truly kept it alive. For years, the main donor had remained anonymous. Now, Malik was looking straight at the answer. Obinna, he whispered. His eyes narrowed as he checked the numbers again. Then once more. The transfers matched private accounts tied to Obinna's business structure. The timing matched the foundation's biggest rescue years. The protected signatures linked back through layers of ownership to the same hidden source. It was him, the man the internet laughed at, The man those women called invisible. He had been quietly carrying vulnerable women through their darkest nights, while the city praised louder, emptier people. Malik pushed back from his desk and stood up. For once, even he needed a moment to absorb what he had found. Across town, in a quiet office lit by a single lamp, Dr. Zora Adebayo Cole sat across from her younger brother. Zora already knew what most of the city did not. She knew Obina's heart was far more dangerous than his money, because it kept giving even when the world gave him very little in return. "You know this will not stay buried forever," she said. Obina sat back in silence, his face unreadable. "If that foundation connection comes out," Zora continued, "people will start running toward you with tears, stories, and hands stretched open. Some will be real, some will be liars." Obina nodded once. "I know." Zora watched him carefully. "Then why do you keep doing it this way? Why never put your name on it?" He took a slow breath before answering. "Because I remember what helplessness feels like," he said quietly, "and people in that place do not need a famous name." So he began checking old beneficiary records, cross-referencing emergency grants and legal aid cases tied to the foundation's strongest years. That was when he found something that made his hand stop on the mouse. One old file, one protected record, one beneficiary profile from years earlier. Malik clicked it open. He read the case notes once, then again. A young woman fleeing violence in her home. Emergency housing approved, legal support granted, identity shielded, but not hidden enough to escape a careful reporter with access to the right documents. And attached to that record was a name he already knew. A name the public knew, too. Malik stared at it in disbelief. Then he sat back slowly, his heart pounding harder than before. Because this was not just a story about a rich man being mocked. This was now a story about irony so brutal it almost felt like judgment. The woman who had publicly laughed at Obina, the woman who called him worthless, the woman who said no one would ever want a man like him, had once been one of the women quietly saved by his money. Malik looked down at the file again, just to make sure he was not imagining it. But the name did not change. It was still there. Vanessa Okafor Banks. And in that moment, Malik understood the next article would not just embarrass the city, it would stop it cold. The following morning, the city woke up expecting more gossip. It got something far worse. It got the truth. Before sunrise, Malik Freeman Asiwaju published his second article. He had checked every record until there was no room for doubt. He knew this story would hit harder than the first one. The first article exposed wealth. This one exposed character, and character always cuts deeper. The headline spread like fire. The man they mocked secretly funded a women's foundation, and one of the women he helped was Vanessa Okafor Banks. Silence hit before outrage did. Then the city exploded. Phones buzzed across Silvercrest Heights. Screens lit up in bedrooms, kitchens, offices, and car seats. People opened the article and froze. They read about the Haven Bloom Foundation. They read about years of emergency housing, legal support, rent relief, and rescue services. They read that the silent man carrying mortar had been the anonymous force behind it. And then they reached the part about Vanessa. Years earlier, when Vanessa was still a frightened young woman trying to escape violence in her home, the foundation had stepped in. Her emergency housing had been covered. Her legal support had been funded. Her first safe breathing room had come through money linked directly back to Obina Cole Adebayo, the same man she mocked in public, the same man she called worthless, the same man she said no woman should ever want. Inside her luxury apartment, Vanessa sat frozen at her kitchen counter, staring at the article on her phone like it was written in a language she could not understand. She read it once, then again, then a third time. Her fingers trembled. "No," she whispered. "No." But the details were too precise. The dates, the grant records, the protected case references. Even without every private detail exposed, she knew it was true. Her chest tightened, because memories she had buried under years of designer clothes and polished cruelty were now rising whether she wanted them or not. The cheap room where she once hid, the fear she used to carry in her throat, the desperation, the shame. The day she learned some stranger had paid for the help she needed when she had nowhere else to go. She never knew who that stranger was, until now, and now she knew it was the man she laughed at in the street. Vanessa pushed the phone away like it had burned her. For the first time in years, she did not feel glamorous. She did not feel powerful. She felt exposed. Across town, Shanice Bello-Reed was pacing in panic. Unlike Vanessa, Shanice did not collapse into shame first. She collapsed into fear. Her mind rushed straight toward survival. "Do not admit anything," she snapped over the phone. "Do you hear me? They want drama. Do not give them tears." Vanessa's voice came out thin. "He helped me." Shanice shut her eyes in frustration. "That was years ago. It changes nothing." But they both knew that was a lie, because it changed everything. Not far away, Councilwoman Patrice Dunlow Asiwaju stood in a private office with the curtains drawn, pressing her phone tightly to her ear. Patrice was not grieving for Vanessa. She was calculating damage. One hidden truth had already come out. That meant others could too. "Find out what else that reporter has," she said coldly to a trusted contact. "Now." Her voice stayed calm, but fear was creeping in beneath it. Meanwhile, at the construction site, the atmosphere around Obinna had changed again. Workers moved in silence. Men who once joked loudly now spoke carefully. Some looked at him with open respect, others with disbelief, but Obinna himself remained the same, steady, quiet, focused. He had not yet seen the article, or if he had, he gave no sign. By midday, the comments online became unbearable. Women who had once been helped by the Haven Bloom Foundation began sharing their stories, one after another. A mother saved from homelessness, a girl whose schooling was restored, a woman who escaped abuse because someone paid for legal help she could never afford. All of them were unknowingly pointing back to the same man in dusty boots. Back in her apartment, Vanessa finally stood up and walked to her bathroom. She locked the door behind her. Then she slid down to the floor and covered her face. And this time, there was no audience, no camera, no performance, just the crushing weight of one terrible truth. She had spent years becoming the kind of cruel, heartless person she once begged the world to save her from. And now, the man who had quietly helped save her life had become the mirror she could no longer avoid. But as devastating as that truth was, another truth was already waiting in the shadows. Because Vanessa was not the only woman whose life had crossed Obinna's long before she ever knew his name. 2 days after Vanessa's public collapse, the city was still drowning in shock. But Malik Freeman Asiwaju was not finished. The deeper he dug into the old records of the Haven Bloom Foundation, the more he realized Vanessa's connection to Obinna Cole Adebayo was not the only hidden thread in this story. There was another file, another family, another rescue buried in the past, and this one made his heart pound for a completely different reason. Late that afternoon, Malik sat in his office, scrolling through protected case notes from years earlier. One case involved a woman fleeing a dangerous home with her little daughter. Emergency shelter, food support, quiet relocation help. The mother's name was there. Mama Ife Daniels. Malik's eyes narrowed. He knew that name. A few more clicks confirmed what he feared and what he needed. The little girl in that file had grown up into Amara Daniels Okoye. Malik leaned back slowly, stunned, because this meant the woman Obinna was now being drawn toward, the same woman who offered him water by the roadside and spoke to him with simple kindness, had already been touched by his hidden generosity long before either of them knew it. This was no longer just a scandal, it was becoming something else, something deeper, something that felt almost written. At the same time, across town, Obinna was handling another burden in the quiet way only he knew how. Inside a hospital billing office, under cold lights and tired faces, he sat across from an administrator, reviewing a stack of outstanding charges. He did not announce himself. He did not ask for special treatment. He simply listened, signed papers, and covered every bill tied to Mama Ife's care. When the administrator looked up in surprise, Obinna only said, "Make sure she gets what she needs." That was all. No speech, no credit, just action. From there, he made another private call. This time, it was about Amara. He reached out to a trusted academic advisor and quietly reopened the path Amara had lost years before. He asked about re-entry options, tuition restoration, and a way for her to continue her abandoned training in design and structural planning, not as charity, as restoration, because Obinna had listened when she spoke, and unlike most people, he remembered. By evening, Amara was at the hospital visiting her mother when a staff member approached with new paperwork and unexpected news. The balance due had been cleared, all of it. Amara stared at the page, confused. "There must be a mistake," she said. The staff member shook her head. "No mistake, it has been handled." Amara's chest tightened. She already knew who it had to be. When she stepped into her mother's room, Mama Ife Daniels was resting against her pillows, her face tired but peaceful. Mama Ife was a gentle, strong woman whose life had taught her how to endure pain without letting it harden her heart. Amara sat beside her bed, still clutching the paper. "He paid it," she said softly. "It had to be him." Mama Ife looked at her daughter for a long moment, then gave a faint, knowing smile. "Some blessings come quietly," she said. "The loud ones are not always the real ones." Amara looked down, overwhelmed. Before she could even process that shock, another one followed. She received a message about a revived opening to resume the study path she once lost. The design and structural planning program she gave up years ago was suddenly possible again. Now her eyes filled, not because of the opportunity alone, because whoever was doing this had paid attention, really paid attention. Meanwhile, back in his office, Malik was preparing his next article. He knew he had to be careful. This story was not just powerful. It was sacred in a way most public stories were not. But the connection was too important to ignore. He began drafting the piece that would link Obinna, Amara, and the old foundation case from years ago. A mother rescued, a child protected, a woman who grew up and met the same hidden benefactor without even knowing it. That night, after closing her stall, Amara finally sat alone and read through the records Malik had quietly sent for verification. She read every line, then she went still, because the truth was now standing in front of her in a way she could not deny. The man she was slowly, carefully beginning to trust, the man who listened to her by the roadside, the man who had already started helping her family, again without asking for praise, had been protecting her long before that broken truck ever stopped near her stall. And with that realization came something even more frightening than shock. It was the terrifying, beautiful possibility that this love story may have started years before either of them knew it. The following night, after learning that Obinna Cole Adebayo had been connected to her life long before they ever met, Amara Daniels Okoye could not sleep. His voice stayed in her mind, His silence stayed in her chest. And now, so did the truth. By morning, she could no longer carry the questions alone. So when Obinna arrived near her roadside stall, just after sunrise, calm as always, Amara stepped out from behind the counter before he could even speak. Her eyes were wet, not with anger. With emotion she was still trying to understand. "We need to talk," she said. Obinna looked at her face and instantly knew this was no ordinary conversation. A few minutes later, they sat on the same low curb where their bond first began. But nothing felt simple now. The air was heavier. The truth between them had grown larger than either of them expected. Amara held her phone tightly in her hand. "I read everything," she said. "About the foundation, about my mother, about me." Obinna's jaw tightened slightly. He did not interrupt. Amara's voice trembled. "You were already in our lives," she said. "Years ago, before the truck, before the water, before I even knew your name." Obinna lowered his eyes for a moment, then looked back at her with painful honesty. "I did not know it was your family," he said. "Most of the people helped through the foundation were names on files. I never met them. I never asked to." Amara stared at him, and somehow that made it hit even harder, because if he had done all of that without even knowing who she was, then his kindness had been real in the purest way. No performance, no strategy, no hidden reward. She swallowed hard. "It feels like fate kept circling us back to each other," she whispered. Obinna said nothing at first, but the way he looked at her told her he felt it too. While that quiet, emotional moment unfolded by the roadside, chaos was erupting elsewhere. Inside her apartment, Shanice Bello-Reed was in full panic mode. The public had turned on her. Her reputation was burning. Her old cruelty was resurfacing. And now Obinna's image was rising higher with every new revelation. To Shanice, that meant only one thing. If she could not control the story, she had to poison it. So she opened her phone, began recording, and posted a new message with tears in her voice and lies in her mouth. She hinted that Obinna used money to get close to vulnerable women. She implied that his kindness came with hidden strings. She never said enough to be clearly sued in one sentence, but she said enough to plant suspicion, and that was exactly her goal. Across town, Vanessa Okafor Banks saw the post and froze. She was already drowning in shame, but now Shanice was pulling her towards something even uglier. A lie, a desperate lie. Shanice called immediately. "Say something!" Shanice snapped. "Back me up! If we let him stay untouchable, we are finished." Vanessa's voice came out weak. "I cannot do this." "You can, and you will," Shanice shot back, "unless you want to go down alone." Vanessa closed her eyes, because part of her, the broken, terrified part, wanted escape so badly that even dishonesty started sounding like survival. And standing just behind that pressure, quietly pushing the confusion forward, was Councilwoman Patrice Dunlo Asiwaju. Patrice did not post publicly. She did something more dangerous. She made private calls. She encouraged noise. She wanted the story messy, emotional, and divided, because chaos was useful. If the public stayed distracted by drama, they might not look too closely at her own secrets. But Malik Freeman Asiwaju was already watching. The experienced reporter saw Shanice's new claims and immediately noticed what was missing. Proof, dates, details, consistency. He started digging again, and the more he checked, the worse it looked, because this was not random panic. It looked coordinated. By late evening, Jabari Cole pulled Obinna aside at the site, his face grim. "They are moving differently now," Jabari said. "This is no longer mockery. This is sabotage." Obinna stood still, his expression hardening just slightly. He had endured insult. He had endured exposure. But lies were another matter. At that same hour, in his office, Malik opened a chain of messages he had just uncovered. He read them once, then again, and his face went cold, because the evidence was now pointing toward something darker than simple slander. It appeared Shanice and Patrice were not just panicking. They were working together, and if Malik was right, the next scandal would not just ruin reputations. It could bring the law to their doors. By the next afternoon, the fear inside Shanice Bello-Reed's apartment had turned into full-blown desperation. Her lie had not calmed the storm. It had made it worse. People were asking questions she could not answer. Reporters were circling. Former friends were going silent. Even the fake sympathy she expected online was weak and fading. For the first time in a long time, Shanice was losing control of the story. And in his office, Malik Freeman Asiwaju was finally seeing why. He had spent the night tracing message chains, voice notes, and private contact records. Malik was careful. He never rushed when the truth was this dangerous. But once the pattern became clear, even he had to sit back for a second. Because this was not one woman spiraling on her own. This was coordinated. Shanice had been exchanging messages with Councilwoman Patrice Dunlow Asiwaju, and the tone of those messages was ugly. Patrice never wrote anything too direct. She was too calculating for that. But her meaning was clear. Stir confusion, push emotional claims, distract the public, shift the heat. And Shanice, panicked and reckless, had followed the script. Malik narrowed his eyes as he read through it all. "So this is how you plan to survive," he murmured. At the same time, Vanessa Okafor Banks was reaching the end of her own emotional rope. She had spent days hiding from calls, avoiding mirrors, and drowning in the shame of what she had become. But now Shanice's lies had crossed a line she could no longer ignore. Vanessa stormed into Shanice's apartment without warning. Shanice looked up from her phone. "You could have called." Vanessa slammed the door behind her. "You are trying to destroy him now?" she demanded. "After everything we found out?" Shanice rolled her eyes. "Please do not start acting holy now. We are both drowning." Vanessa stepped closer, furious. "No, you are drowning, and you are trying to pull me down with you." Shanice stood up fast. "Do not do that. Do not stand there and act better than me. You mocked him too." Vanessa's face tightened. "Yes, I did, and I have to live with that. But I will not lie on him." That was the crack, and once it opened, years of poison came pouring out. Shanice laughed bitterly. "You always thought you were above me, even when I was the one cleaning up your mess." Vanessa fired back. "You mean recording people, humiliating people, and calling it loyalty?" Shanice's eyes flashed. "At least I never pretended to be kind." The room exploded into shouting. Old jealousy surfaced. Hidden resentment surfaced. The ugly truth of their friendship came into the light at last. It had never been built on love. It had been built on vanity, mutual use, and shared cruelty. And now that bond was breaking. Not far away, Patrice received a frantic call from Shanice, but instead of helping, the councilwoman turned colder than ever. "Handle your own mess," Patrice said flatly. "You have already said too much." Shanice froze. "You pushed this." Patrice's voice dropped even lower. "Then learn this quickly. Panic is for people without discipline." The line went dead. For the first time, Shanice understood the truth. Patrice was sacrificing her. Meanwhile, on the roadside near Amara's stall, another kind of danger was rising. Tari Daniels, still fiercely protective of his family, had overheard part of the growing scandal. He knew lies were spreading around Obinna, and his temper flared instantly. "They think they can use him and then destroy him," Tari snapped. "Let me find one of them." He had already started moving when Obinna stepped in front of him. "Stop." The word was calm, but firm enough to freeze him. Tari's chest rose and fell. "They are lying on you." "I know," Obinna said. "Then why are you standing here?" Obinna held his gaze, because losing control is how people like them win. Tari clenched his fists, but slowly his breathing steadied. Amara, who had been watching, felt something settle even deeper inside her, because once again, Obinna showed the same thing he always showed, under pressure. Not weakness, mastery, and that calm made her trust him more than ever. By evening, Malik had seen enough. He packaged the clearest evidence and quietly sent it to the proper authorities before preparing his next report. He knew what would happen next. Once that evidence started moving, events would move fast, very fast, and as the sun dropped and the city held its breath, one truth became impossible to ignore. This scandal was no longer staying online. The law was now stepping in, and before the next day was over, one of those women would not be walking away in heels. She would be led away in disgrace. The following morning, the tension that had been building for days finally broke. Not with gossip, not with another cruel post, but with consequences. By sunrise, whispers were already moving through Silvercrest Heights. Phones were buzzing, screens were lighting up. People who had spent the week feeding on scandal were now waking up to something far more serious. The authorities had stepped in, and this time, nobody could laugh their way out of it. Inside her apartment, Shanice Bello-Reed had not slept. Her mascara was smeared. Her hair was undone. Her phone battery had died twice during the night because she kept checking every notification, every mention, every new post dragging her name through the dirt. Then came the knock, hard, official, final. Her whole body went still. For 1 second, Shanice looked like a frightened child trapped inside the life she had built with mockery and noise. Then she rushed to the door, opened it, and found exactly what she feared. Serious faces, calm voices, no patience for tears. They questioned her about false claims, deliberate defamation, and coordinated efforts to damage Obinna's reputation with lies dressed up as emotional truth. Shanice tried to speak fast. She tried to confuse the moment. She tried to act misunderstood. But for the first time, her words had no power, because the evidence existed, and evidence does not care how loudly a liar cries. By mid-morning, the news had spread. Former victims of Shanice's online cruelty began stepping forward one after another. Women she had mocked, men she had embarrassed, small people she had humiliated because she thought they could do nothing back. Now they were speaking, and every new voice made her image fall harder. Elsewhere, Councilwoman Patrice Dunlow Asiwaju was facing a collapse of her own. The polished woman who had always hidden behind elegance and careful language was now being crushed by a different kind of exposure. Questions were rising about stolen project credit, quiet influence, private manipulation, backroom pressure. People she once controlled were suddenly distancing themselves. Her office, once full of confident movement, now felt cold and hollow. Calls stopped being returned, smiles disappeared. Allies started sounding like strangers. For the first time in years, Patrice was learning what it felt like to lose control of the room, and there was no speech polished enough to save her from that. Meanwhile, in her silent apartment, Vanessa Okafor Banks sat alone. No calls, no glam team, no social invitations, just silence, the kind of silence that forces a woman to hear herself clearly. She stared at her own reflection for a long time, and what she saw was not the polished beauty Silvercrest Heights admired. She saw a woman stripped of performance, a woman who had spent years building a perfect image while burying an ugly truth. She had become cruel because cruelty made her feel protected, and now that armor had shattered. Across town, in a crowded community hall, Pastor Elijah Kane stood before a restless audience and delivered the kind of truth nobody likes hearing when they know it applies to them. Downfall does not begin the day the public turns on you, he said in his deep, steady voice. Downfall begins the day pride mistakes itself for power. The room went still. His words spread fast, because everyone knew exactly who he meant. At the construction site, workers passed phones around and spoke in low voices, but Obinna Adebayo remained the same. He continued moving through the site with quiet focus, giving orders, checking work, and keeping his mind on the day in front of him. He did not smile at Shanice's collapse. He did not celebrate Patrice's panic. He did not gloat. When Jabari Cole muttered that both women were finally getting what they deserved, Obinna only shook his head. Another person's ruin is not my joy, he said. Jabari looked at him for a long moment and said nothing, because that answer sounded exactly like him, and that was why men followed him. Not because he was rich, because he was rare. Later that afternoon, Amara Daniels Okoye watched him from a short distance, her heart tightening in a new way. She had seen wealth before. She had seen people with influence before. But this was different. Obinna's real strength was not his money. It was his discipline, his restraint, his mercy. And the more she saw it, the more dangerous her feelings became. Then, just before the workday ended, a familiar figure appeared near the fence line. A woman in plain clothes. No luxury performance, no polished smile, no audience, just trembling hands and broken pride. It was Vanessa. She stood there like someone who barely recognized herself anymore. When Obinna finally turned and saw her, the sight seemed to fall silent all at once. Vanessa swallowed hard. Then she took one small step forward. "I need to speak to you," she said, and for the first time in years, there was no arrogance left in her voice. Only ruin, only shame, only the sound of a woman who had finally been forced to face herself. That same evening, after Vanessa appeared at the construction site in plain clothes and trembling silence, the air around the workers changed. No one laughed, no one whispered. Even the noise of the site seemed to pull back, because the woman standing at the fence was not the same Vanessa Okafor Banks who had mocked Obinna Adebayo in public. The sharp-tongued socialite, who once wore pride like a crown, now looked like a woman who had been stripped of every false layer she had built around herself. Obinna handed off what was in his hands, then walked toward her slowly. He stopped a few feet away. Vanessa opened her mouth, but for a moment no words came out. That alone told Obinna how broken she really was. Finally, she looked up at him, and her eyes were already wet. "I know, sorry is not enough," she said, her voice shaking. "I know I do not deserve your patience. I know I do not deserve even this moment." Obinna said nothing. He just stood there and listened. Vanessa's chest rose and fell. She was trying to hold herself together, but the truth inside her was heavier than pride now. "When I looked at you that day," she said, "I was not just mocking you. I was attacking the part of myself I spent years trying to bury." Obinna's face remained calm, but his eyes stayed fixed on hers. Vanessa wiped at her tears with unsteady fingers. "I came from the same kind of struggle I laughed at," she whispered. "I know what it feels like to be looked down on. I know what it feels like to need help and have no power. And instead of healing, I became cruel. I became the very thing I once begged the world to save me from." A heavy silence fell between them, not the silence of emptiness, the silence of truth finally being spoken out loud. Vanessa swallowed hard and forced herself to continue. "And the worst part is this," she said. "The man I humiliated, the man I called worthless, was the same man whose kindness once helped keep my life from falling apart." Her voice cracked. "I became the kind of person my younger self would have feared." For the first time since she started speaking, Obinna lowered his eyes for a brief second, not because he was shaken by her tears, but because he knew what it cost a person to finally see themselves clearly. Still, when he looked back at her, he did not rush to comfort her. He did not say, "It's okay," because it was not okay, and both of them knew that. Vanessa looked terrified of what he might say next. A rejection would make sense. A cold dismissal would make sense. Even anger would make sense. But Obinna had never been a man driven by the easiest emotion in the room. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "If you really understand what you became," he said, "then do something real about it." Vanessa blinked. She had expected judgment. She had expected punishment. She had not expected instruction. Obinna continued. "The Haven Bloom Foundation still runs. Women still arrive there afraid. Some come with nothing. Some come carrying the same kind of pain you once carried." Vanessa stared at him, barely breathing. "If you want to apologize," he said, "do not do it with speeches. Do not do it with tears in front of me. Do it with work." Her lips parted slightly. "Work?" she repeated. Obinna nodded once. "Serve there, quietly. No cameras, no posts, no interviews, no rebuilding your image off the backs of broken people. Just show up and help." Vanessa looked stunned, because what he had placed in front of her was harder than public shame. He had placed responsibility in front of her. He had given her a doorway, not to easy forgiveness, to change. "That's all?" she asked weakly. Obinna's expression did not change. "That is not a small thing," he said, and she knew he was right, because real change was not glamorous. It was slow, it was humbling, it was work no one applauded while you were doing it. Vanessa lowered her head, tears slipping down again, but this time they were different. They were not the tears of someone begging to escape consequences. They were the tears of someone realizing she had just been offered a chance she did not deserve, and she did not know how to carry it yet. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Obinna gave no dramatic reply. He simply stepped back. The conversation was over. He turned and walked back toward the site. Vanessa stood still for several long seconds, as if her legs had forgotten how to move. Then she reached into her bag with shaking hands, pulled out her phone, and searched for the Foundation's volunteer page. Her finger hovered over the screen. No announcement, no post, no public statement. Then, with tears still in her eyes, she signed up. That same night, in a quiet room at the Haven Bloom Foundation, Vanessa walked through the doors for the first time, not as a polished woman seeking attention, but as a humbled one carrying shame. And when she saw frightened women sitting with their pain folded into their shoulders, something inside her cracked even deeper, because they looked too much like the girl she used to be. But while one woman had finally stepped onto the path of change, another woman was still choosing survival over truth, and before the next day was over, Councilwoman Patrice Dunlow Asiwaju would make one final move to save herself. The following afternoon, while Vanessa Okafor-Banks was still reeling from her first quiet hours inside the Haven Bloom Foundation, another woman was preparing for war. Not redemption, war. Councilwoman Patrice Dunlow Asiwaju had spent her entire public life surviving with polish, calculation, and control. She did not cry when pressure came. She did not confess when truth got close. She adjusted. She redirected. She sacrificed weaker people if she had to. And now, with scandal tightening around her neck, she was preparing one last performance. By noon, she stood behind a polished podium in a carefully arranged press room, dressed in calm authority and borrowed dignity. The cameras were ready. The microphones were lined up. Her staff looked tense, but Patrice held herself like a woman who still believed she could command the room. When she began speaking, her voice was smooth. "I am the target of a coordinated attack," she said. Certain people are weaponizing rumor, emotional outrage, and selective information to destroy a lifetime of public service. A few reporters exchanged looks. Patrice kept going. She called herself misunderstood. She called herself misrepresented. She spoke of enemies, agendas, and smear campaigns. She tried to wrap herself in the language of victimhood. For a few minutes she almost sounded convincing, but far across town, Malik Freeman Asiwaju was watching the live broadcast from his office with a face like stone, because he had the truth, and this time he had all of it. The careful investigative reporter had spent the last 24 hours pulling together the final chain of evidence. Documents, internal memos, credit theft, private deals, pressure tactics, quiet manipulations buried beneath years of elegant speeches and fake public virtue. Patrice had not just been cold, she had been corrupt. She had accepted praise for projects built on other people's ideas. She had steered influence where it benefited her. She had hidden behind good causes while using power like a private weapon. And now Malik was ready. Minutes after Patrice ended her speech, his article went live. The headline was brutal. The mask falls. Evidence exposes years of manipulation, stolen credit, and private deals linked to councilwoman Patrice Dunlow Asiwaju. The effect was immediate. Phones started buzzing in the press room before reporters even left their seats. Staff members glanced down and went pale. One reporter reopened his laptop on the spot. Another stopped halfway to the exit and turned back toward the podium with a completely different expression. Patrice saw the shift, and for the first time that day, her calm cracked. By evening, the people who once stood proudly beside her were pulling away one by one. Private allies became distant. Public defenders went silent. The same people who had hidden behind her power now started saving themselves. That was the worst part. Not the headlines, not the cameras, the abandonment. Because Patrice had built her life on control, and now she could not even control the speed of her own collapse. By nightfall, she was forced to resign. No triumphant speech, no dramatic defense, just a cold, humiliating retreat written in formal language and empty dignity. And yet, even that could not save her reputation, because the city had finally seen what she really was. At the same time, another severing was taking place. In a dim apartment filled with bitter silence, Shanice Bello-Reed, now disgraced and isolated, stared at her phone for a long time before dialing Vanessa's number. Her pride was shattered, but desperation had made her bold enough to try. When Vanessa answered, Shanice's voice came out smaller than usual. "I need to see you." There was a pause. Then Vanessa spoke, and her voice was different now. Softer, steadier, cleaner. "No." Shanice froze. "Vanessa." "I will not go back to that version of my life," Vanessa said. "Not for comfort, not for fear, not for you." The line went dead, and just like that, the last rope between them snapped. Elsewhere, in a much smaller and humbler place, new hope was beginning. Tari Daniels, who had spent so much of this ordeal burning with anger and fear for his family, sat across from Obinna at a plain table near the worksite. Tari was still young, still rough around the edges, but he was learning, slowly. Obinna had arranged for him to shadow a skilled trade supervisor and begin proper training. Not a handout, a path. "A real chance is wasted on people who do not respect it," Obinna told him. Tari nodded, serious for once. "I won't waste it." That moment mattered more than either of them said, because for the Daniels family, this was not just help, it was a new beginning. Later that evening, in Mama Eve Daniels' hospital room, the older woman looked from her daughter to Obinna with tired but knowing eyes. Her voice was gentle, but it carried the weight of a mother who had suffered enough to recognize what was real. Some unions are written in pain before they bloom in joy, she said. Amara lowered her gaze, her heart already beating too fast, because she knew what was coming before Obinna even spoke. For a moment, the room felt still. Then Obinna looked at Amara Daniels Okoye with the full honesty he had carried so quietly for so long. I searched for real love for years, he said, and after a while, I stopped believing it was still meant for me. Amara's eyes filled instantly, but he was not finished. Then you handed me a bottle of water, he said softly, and somehow that felt more honest than everything money ever brought into my life. The room seemed to disappear around them. Mama Ife smiled faintly and looked away, as if she knew this moment belonged to something bigger than words. Amara's hand trembled where it rested beside her. Then slowly, she reached for his, and when her fingers closed around his hand, she looked him in the eyes with tears shining there. I need to tell you something too, she whispered, and in that suspended moment, with the old world collapsing behind them and a new one trembling in front of them, everything changed again. That same night, in the quiet hospital room where Mama Ife Daniels rested and hope hung softly in the air, Amara Daniels Okoye still had her hand wrapped around Obinna Cole Adebayo's. The world outside had been loud for weeks, cruel, shocking, relentless, but in that moment, everything was quiet, and for the first time, the silence between them was no longer carrying secrets, it was carrying truth. Amara looked into Obinna's eyes, and the tears she had been holding back finally spilled over. I need to tell you something too, she whispered. Obinna did not move, he did not rush her, he simply held her hand and waited, the same way he always did when something mattered. Amara took a shaky breath. I do not love you because of your money, she said. I do not love you because people now know your name. I do not love you because of what you built. Her voice trembled, but it did not break. I love you because you saw me when life was trying to erase me. You listened when I was tired. You paid attention when everyone else only looked. You made me feel like my pain mattered before I ever knew what you had. Obinna's throat tightened. Amara's fingers held his a little more firmly. You came into my life like a quiet answer, she said, and the strangest part is, it feels like my heart knew you before my mind did. For 1 second, Obinna could not speak. This was the man who had endured public humiliation without a word, the man who had carried other people's burdens in silence for years, the man who had survived mockery, loneliness, and hidden sacrifice. But now, in front of this woman, his composure trembled, because real love had finally found the place in him that pain could not harden. He let out a slow breath and looked at her like a man seeing light after too much darkness. That bottle of water, he said quietly, healed something in me that I had stopped trying to fix. Amara's eyes filled again. Obinna's voice stayed low, but every word carried weight. I had money, I had respect, I had more than enough to fill a house, but inside I was still walking around empty in places no one could see, and then you treated me like I was just a man worth caring about. He swallowed hard. That changed me. Mama Ife, still resting against her pillows, smiled softly and turned her gaze away, giving them the dignity of privacy inside a moment that felt almost sacred. A week later, the story that had once spread through Silvercrest Heights as scandal spread again, but this time it was different. There was no mockery in it now, no cruel laughter. The people who once watched Obinna through the lens of gossip now saw him standing openly beside Amara, and for once, the city was witnessing something clean, something real, not a performance, not a headline built on humiliation, but the quiet beginning of a love people could feel was honest. In the weeks that followed, Amara stepped back into the future she once thought she lost. With Obinna's support, not as charity, but as belief, she resumed her studies in design and structural planning. This time, she did not walk into that dream as a frightened girl, forced to choose survival over purpose. She walked in as a woman who had survived enough to know the value of being seen, and she was not the only one changing. At the Haven Bloom Foundation, Vanessa continued showing up in silence. She folded clothes, she stocked supplies, she sat with frightened women who arrived carrying the same kind of fear she once knew too well. No cameras followed her, no audience clapped for her. Day by day, she learned the truth Obinna had tried to hand her from the beginning. Redemption was not a speech, it was work. Meanwhile, Obinna kept funding shelters, opportunities, and second chances. But now, he no longer carried everything alone. The same man, who had spent years walking through life in quiet sacrifice, was finally walking beside someone who saw his heart before she saw his status. And when the time came, they chose not to celebrate their love with spectacle. They chose something simple, beautiful, true. Surrounded by workers, family, and people whose lives had been touched by Obinna's hidden generosity, Obinna and Amara stood together and began their new life. No arrogance, no performance, just gratitude. Because in the end, the women who mocked him thought he was only carrying mortar. They never knew he was carrying broken lives, fragile futures, buried hope, and people who needed someone strong enough to keep showing up without applause. They called him invisible, but he had been holding up the world around them, all along. And when the noise finally faded, the quietest man in the story received the one thing he had never been able to buy. A love that saw him clearly, a love that stayed, a love that proved the greatest people are often the ones the world is foolish enough to overlook. And that was the final truth. The man they laughed at was never just a worker in dust. He was the strongest heart among them. And in the end, that heart was finally seen. In the end, this story teaches a simple but powerful lesson. Never measure a human being by appearance, status, or struggle. The people who laughed at Obinna thought dust on his clothes meant emptiness in his life. They thought sweat meant weakness. They thought silence meant worthlessness. But they were wrong, very wrong. This story reminds us that some of the greatest people move quietly. Some of the kindest hearts do the most good where no cameras can see. And sometimes, the person the world looks down on is the very person holding others up. It also teaches that cruelty can destroy a person's image, but humility can rebuild a soul. Vanessa learned that. Shanice and Patrice learned the hard way. And Obinna proved that real greatness does not need to shout. So before you mock someone, before you judge someone, before you call anyone less than, remember this: you do not know who they are, what they carry, or what they have survived. What do you think about this story? Do you believe Vanessa truly deserved redemption, or was Obinna too kind? I want to hear your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I will see you again in another video. This is Mr. Hope.